There is a version of your day that most people never talk about. Not the version where you accomplish things, made progress, checked the boxes. Not the version that looks good in a summary or sounds right when someone asks how you are doing. The interior version, the one where you spent significant portions of the day doing things you did not fully want to do in exchange for outcomes you are not entirely sure you want, driven by pressures you did not consciously choose, moving fast enough that you rarely stopped to ask whether any of it was actually working. And somewhere in the middle of all that movement, the emails, the obligations, the effort, the performance, the endless cycle of doing and wanting and measuring and worrying, you felt it, that quiet, almost invisible sense of going through the motions, of being on a treadmill that is moving too fast to get off, but not taking you anywhere you genuinely chose to go. This is not a problem of laziness. People who feel this way are often the hardest workers in the room. It is a problem of disconnection between the action and the actor, between the doing and the being, between the life you are living and the life you are actually somewhere in your depths trying to live. And what I want to offer you today is one of the most ancient and most misunderstood solutions to this disconnection that the human tradition has produced. It is called karma yoga, and in the hands of Krishna, speaking to Arjuna on the edge of a battlefield, it becomes something far more radical, far more practical, and far more personally liberating than most people who have heard the word karma have ever imagined. Stay with me, because by the end of this, the way you understand your own work and your own life may never be quite the same. Before we go anywhere, we need to clear something up, because the word karma, as most people in the modern world use it, has almost nothing to do with what Krishna means. Karma, in popular culture, is a cosmic ledger. What goes around, comes around. Do good, good returns to you. Do harm, and harm finds its way back. It is a moral accounting system, satisfying in its symmetry, useful as a reminder to behave decently, but ultimately rather limited as a spiritual teaching. What Krishna means by karma is far simpler and far more profound. Karma means action. Just that, action. The Sanskrit root of the word refers to any act, physical, mental, or verbal, that produces an effect. Every movement of the body, every choice, every word, every intentional gesture in the world. This is karma. And karma yoga is the yoga, the discipline, the path of action. It is the teaching of how to act in the world in a way that does not bind you, does not diminish you, does not accumulate the kind of inner weight that most of us carry without fully knowing we are carrying it. Krishna introduces this teaching in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, and it is immediately clear that he is addressing something fundamental, not a side issue, not a supplementary practice for people who cannot manage meditation, but one of the central paths to liberation available to anyone, in any life, in any circumstances. And the reason he introduces it is revealing. Arjuna has just suggested, after hearing the first teachings on the nature of the self, that maybe the best thing to do is simply withdraw. If action leads to attachment, and attachment leads to suffering, then perhaps the answer is to stop acting, to become still, to remove oneself from the entire field of cause and effect. And Krishna says, no, that is not the teaching. That has never been the teaching. He says, not for a single moment can a person exist without performing action. The nature of life is action. You cannot opt out. Even the decision not to act is an act. Even stillness in a living being involves 1,000 unconscious actions every moment. The question is never whether to act. The question is how, from what place, with what relationship to the outcome, in what spirit. And the answer he gives changes everything. The most famous verse in the entire Bhagavad Gita, perhaps the most quoted spiritual teaching in all of human history, comes in this section. Krishna says, "You have the right to perform your prescribed duties, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty." Let us sit with this, because it is extraordinarily easy to misread. The first misreading is the most common, that this is a teaching about not caring about results. Do your work, detach from what happens, be indifferent to outcomes. But that is not what Krishna says. He does not say do not care. He says you are not entitled to the fruits. There is a profound difference. Entitlement, in this sense, means the belief that your action guarantees a specific outcome, that if you work hard enough, carefully enough, correctly enough, the result you want will arrive. And therefore, when the result you want does not arrive, when the work is done and the reward does not appear, when the effort is sincere and the outcome disappoints, the self that believed in that entitlement is shattered, betrayed, broken. This shattering is something almost every adult has experienced. You did everything right, and it still went wrong. You gave everything you had, and it was not enough. You followed the rules, and the rules did not protect you. And the suffering that comes from that, the sense of cosmic injustice, the loss of faith, the grief of a self that believed the universe was obligated to reward sincere effort, that suffering is what Krishna is addressing. He is not saying the results do not matter. He is saying that making the results the condition of your peace is a recipe for a life held hostage, a life in which your inner state is permanently at the mercy of external outcomes you cannot fully control. And he is offering something else, a different relationship to action entirely. One in which the action itself, the quality of attention, the sincerity of effort, the presence you bring, becomes the thing, the whole thing, not as a path to a result, but as a complete act in itself. This is Karma Yoga. And it is one of the most radical reframings of human effort ever articulated. But let us get specific, because in the abstract, this sounds beautiful and perhaps a little distant from the texture of a real working life. You have deadlines, you have bills, you have people depending on you, you have ambitions that are real and important, you have outcomes you genuinely care about, not out of vanity or attachment, but because you are a human being with real stakes in the world. How do you practice Karma Yoga in that context? Krishna addresses this directly, and his answer is both more practical and more demanding than most people expect. He says, do your work. Do it fully. Do it with your complete attention and your complete skill. Bring everything you have to the action itself, and then release the outcome, not abandon it. Not become indifferent to it, but release your grip on it. Release the belief that the outcome belongs to you, that you have earned a specific result, that the quality of your action obligates the universe to deliver what you expect. This is not passivity. In fact, Krishna is unusually emphatic about this. He says explicitly that inaction is not an option, that withdrawal is not enlightenment, that the person who sits still while pretending to transcend desire but secretly nursing it internally has achieved nothing. What he is describing is full engagement combined with inner freedom. The paradox at the heart of Karma Yoga. You care deeply and act fully, while simultaneously holding the outcome lightly. And the reason this is possible, the reason it is not simply a logical contradiction, is that the energy behind the action changes. When you are acting out of entitlement, the energy is desperate, contracted, There is a quality of grasping in every movement, a constant checking, measuring, comparing the result against the expectation. This grasping exhausts you. It poisons the work with anxiety. It makes every action a form of negotiation with the future rather than a presence with the present. But when you act from what Krishna calls nishkama karma action, without selfish desire for the fruit, the energy is different. It is open, spacious, fully present with what is being done, rather than constantly looking toward what the doing might produce. And paradoxically, though Krishna does not make this the point, it is observably true this quality of action tends to produce better results, because you are actually here, fully engaged with the reality in front of you, rather than half present, while the other half of your attention monitors the future. There is a second dimension of Karma Yoga that does not receive enough attention, and I believe it is the one that speaks most directly to the disconnection I described at the beginning. Krishna says, "Let your actions be an offering. Let everything you do be done as a form of worship, as a gift to the divine, as a contribution to something larger than your personal gain." Now, I want to be careful here, because this language can feel distant or unfamiliar to people who do not come from a devotional background. But strip away the specific religious framing, and what Krishna is pointing to is something psychologically and spiritually precise. He is saying, most of the suffering in work comes not from the work itself, but from the smallness of the container it is done in. When everything you do is done purely for personal benefit, for recognition, for money, for security, for the advancement of the self, the work becomes a narrow and anxious thing. It collapses under the weight of its own stakes. Every task becomes a reflection of your worth. Every failure becomes a verdict on your value as a person. But when the work is done as an offering, when it is given rather than traded, when it is an expression of something you care about beyond yourself, when the primary question shifts from what will I get to what am I contributing, something transforms. The work opens. The anxiety of personal stakes gives way to something more like purpose. The doing becomes connected to a why that is larger than the outcome of any given effort. And that connection to something beyond the self is precisely what gives the energy behind action its most durable and sustaining quality. This is not idealism. It is not a call to abandon ambition or stop caring about results. It is a recognition that the human being is not designed for pure self-interested action, that we are built for contribution, that the deepest satisfactions in work, the ones that actually last, the ones that feel genuinely nourishing rather than merely stimulating, are almost always the ones that have this quality of giving woven into them. Karma Yoga, in this sense, is not a spiritual technique layered on top of ordinary work. It is the discovery of what work was always meant to be. I want to pause here for a moment, because I am aware that what I am describing can sound, in the abstract, like something reserved for people who have the luxury of meaningful work. For people whose circumstances allow for the kind of reflection and choice that Karma Yoga seems to require. And I want to address that directly. Krishna does not teach Karma Yoga to someone living a comfortable life. He teaches it to a warrior on a battlefield, facing the most agonizing moral dilemma imaginable. The context is not peaceful. The circumstances are not favorable. The outcome is genuinely uncertain and genuinely costly. And he says, even here, even in this, even in the middle of difficulty and obligation and stakes that are as real and heavy as stakes get, this practice is possible. This orientation is available. Because Karma Yoga is not about the work you do. It is about how you do it. And how you do it is always, in every circumstance, a choice. Not always an easy one. Not always one that the culture around you will encourage or even understand, but a choice. The person who works a difficult job they did not choose and brings genuine presence and care to that work while holding the outcome with some lightness, that person is practicing Karma Yoga, not despite their difficult circumstances, but within them. The parent doing the unremarkable, unrecognized, endless labor of care, not performing for appreciation, not measuring the return, but simply giving, because the giving is the point. That person is living karma yoga in one of its purest forms. The artist who creates with full effort and then releases the work into the world without clinging to how it is received, practicing it there. The professional who does their best and sleeps at night, not because they controlled the outcome, but because the effort was sincere, practicing it there. This is not a path for monks. It is a path for people who are already in the middle of their lives, already acting, already facing the full complexity and difficulty of existence in the world. It is a path that asks not for different circumstances, but for a different quality of attention within the circumstances you already have. Let me tell you something about the way this teaching lands when you try it. When you genuinely, consciously attempt to bring karma yoga into a single day of your life. What happens is not dramatic. There is no sudden enlightenment, no transformation of the work itself, no magic resolution of the difficulties. What happens is smaller and, in its way, more profound. You notice, perhaps for the first time, with real clarity, how much of your daily energy is spent in the future, how rarely you are actually here, doing this thing, in this moment. How consistently the mind is running its calculations, measuring progress, checking the gap between where you are and where you need to be, monitoring every action for its contribution to an outcome that exists only in projection. And when you practice releasing that, when you practice bringing your full attention back to the action itself, to the quality of what you are doing right now, rather than what it might produce, there is a kind of relief, a loosening of something that has been held very tight for a very long time. It does not last long at first. The habits of outcome attachment are old and deeply grooved. The mind pulls back toward its calculations almost immediately. But for a moment, you were actually here, doing this thing. Present with the reality of the work, rather than the fantasy of the result. And that moment, that small, quiet, easily dismissed moment, is the entire practice. Repeated over time, across the days and years of a life, it accumulates into something that changes the quality of everything. This is what karma yoga feels like from the inside. Not liberation achieved through dramatic renunciation, but peace recovered, moment by moment, through the simple and profound act of doing what is in front of you with your whole self and releasing what you cannot control. There is something I want to ask you, and I want it to be a real question, not a rhetorical one. What is the work in your life right now that carries the most anxiety? Not necessarily the most important work, but the work that generates the most mental noise. The project, the obligation, the area of effort, where the gap between what you are doing and what you need it to produce feels most painful. I want you to hold that in mind as we continue, because the rest of what I want to say is most useful when it has somewhere specific to land. Write it in the comments if you are willing, even a single word about what that work is, what it feels like, and tell me where in the world you are listening from today. What corner of the earth is holding this conversation? Krishna identifies something he calls the three gunas, three qualities or energies that pervade all of nature, including all human action. And understanding them is essential to understanding karma yoga at a deeper level. The first is tamas, heaviness, inertia, dullness. Action that comes from tamas is action done without care, without attention, without any genuine investment of presence or skill. Going through the motions, the minimum required effort. Work done in a fog of disconnection and resistance. The second is rajas, passion, ambition, restlessness, agitation. Action that comes from rajas is driven by desire, by ego, by the desperate need for recognition or reward. It is intense, often impressive from the outside, but burning with the anxiety of attachment. The Raja's worker achieves a great deal and rests very little, because the achieving is always in service of a self that is never satisfied. The third is sattva, clarity, balance, purity of intention. Action that comes from sattva is done with full presence and genuine care, without the fog of tamas or the burning of rajas. It is neither listless nor frantic. It is simply here, engaged, given freely. Most human work lives somewhere between tamas and rajas. Either we are disengaged and doing the minimum, or we are frantically pursuing outcomes with the full force of ego. Very few people, very rarely, find the sattvic quality, the full engagement without ego grasping, the complete effort without desperate attachment. And Krishna says, the path of karma yoga is the path towards sattvic action, not by eliminating effort or eliminating care, but by purifying the motivation behind the action, by gradually shifting from the Raja's energy of I need this result toward the sattvic energy of I am offering this action completely and releasing what comes. This shift does not happen all at once. It is the work of years, of practice, of honest self-examination, of catching yourself in the middle of rajas, in the middle of the anxious, grasping, result-fixated doing, and consciously choosing to return to the quality of full presence without grip. But it is a shift that is available in every moment, in every act. There is a teaching within Karma Yoga that I believe is perhaps the most radical and the most personally demanding of all Krishna's instructions. And it is the one that most directly addresses the experience I described at the beginning, the feeling of going through the motions of disconnection from your own life. Krishna says, see yourself as an instrument, not in the diminishing sense, not as a means to an end, not as something without inherent value or agency, but in the sense that the doer of your actions is not the small, anxious, ego-identified self. The doer is something larger. Call it the divine, call it the cosmic order, call it the intelligence that moves through all living things. You are the vehicle through which it acts, the instrument through which a particular kind of action enters the world. Now, this teaching can be taken in directions that lead to passivity, to abdication of responsibility, to a kind of spiritual bypassing that avoids genuine engagement with life. Krishna is not pointing there. What he is pointing to is a particular quality of participation, one in which you are fully present, fully engaged, fully responsible, but not identified with the outcome as a measure of your personal worth. One in which the action moves through you rather than being squeezed out of you by a self that is desperate to prove something. When you inhabit this understanding, even briefly, even imperfectly, something in the texture of work changes. The contraction that comes from ego-invested action softens. The exhaustion of constantly performing for an invisible audience lifts. The work itself becomes lighter, not because it requires less effort, but because it is no longer carrying the weight of your entire sense of self. And paradoxically, this often makes the work better, because you are no longer working from behind the armor of a self that needs to be defended and validated. You are simply here, open, doing what needs to be done, giving what you have to give. This is the instrument teaching. And in a culture that has almost universally reduced work to a transaction effort traded for reward, time traded for money, self-expression traded for approval, it is quietly revolutionary. Let us talk about one more dimension of Karma Yoga that I think speaks directly to the modern condition, the question of purpose. Because beneath the daily disconnection most people experience in their work, beneath the treadmill feeling and the going through the motions quality, is almost always a question that has not been answered. Not clearly, not honestly, Why am I doing this? Not in the instrumental sense, why this job, why this project, why these particular actions, but in the deeper sense. What is all of this in service of? What is the work of my life actually for? Krishna talks about this through the concept of Svadharma, one's own dharma, one's own particular calling and path. He says that it is better to perform your own dharma imperfectly than to perform another's dharma perfectly. And he means this with an urgency that suggests he knows exactly how much human suffering is generated by people who spend their lives performing someone else's dharma, someone else's definition of success, someone else's idea of what a meaningful life looks like, someone else's expectations about what you should want, what you should become, how you should measure your worth. And the practice of karma yoga at this level is not just a technique for managing attachment to outcomes. It is a practice of discernment, of honest, courageous inquiry into what your work actually is, what the action of your life is actually in service of. Because you can practice non-attachment to outcomes all you like, but if the actions themselves are misaligned, if you are sincerely, fully performing the wrong dharma, the practice will feel hollow. Because the disconnection you feel is not just from the outcome, it is from the action itself, from the gap between what you are doing and what you know, somewhere in your depths, you are here to do. Karma yoga requires both parts. The release of attachment to outcomes, yes, but also the honest alignment with action that is genuinely yours. Work that comes from the direction your soul recognizes as its own. Effort that is, in some sense, an expression of what you are, rather than a performance for what you want. And finding that not as a fixed destination, but as an ongoing inquiry, a gradually clarifying direction. This is perhaps the deepest gift of the karma yoga path. The discovery that action, at its best, is not something you do to the world. It is something you become in the world, an expression of what you are, given freely, without demanding that the world reward you for the particular form of your giving. I want to come back to something Krishna says that I believe holds the key to all of it. The phrase that contains, in compressed form, the entire teaching of karma yoga. He says, yoga is skill in action, not discipline, not renunciation, not detachment in the cold, distant sense of that word. Skill in action. And what does skill mean here? Not technical mastery, though that can be part of it. The skill Krishna is referring to is the skill of being fully present with what you are doing, of bringing your complete attention to the act without the constant distraction of the calculating, outcome-obsessed mind, of meeting each action as a complete reality in itself, rather than as a step towards somewhere else. This is the skill that most of us have almost completely lost. Not because we are incapable of it, we have all felt it in moments of genuine absorption, when the work was so engaging and the present so complete that time disappeared and the gap between the doer and the doing closed. Athletes call it flow. Artists call it being in the zone. Spiritual traditions call it presence. It is available, not just in peak moments, not just in extraordinary circumstances, but in the ordinary, daily texture of an ordinary life. In the washing of dishes, and the writing of reports, and the having of difficult conversations, and the showing up again and again for the work and the people in front of you. Krishna is saying, this quality of presence, applied consistently and deliberately to action, this is yoga, not a posture, not a retreat, not a special practice reserved for dedicated spiritual seekers, but a living, breathing, daily discipline of being here, doing this fully, without the fog of tamas or the fever of rajas, and releasing the result with a kind of trust that is deeper than certainty. This is the life he is pointing toward. not a life without effort or ambition or genuine engagement with the world, but a life in which the effort is clean, in which the action is free, in which the doing of life is no longer a performance you give in exchange for a result you need, but an expression you make in offering to something larger than the small self that is always keeping score. You have been doing things your entire life, working, building, caring, trying, failing, and trying again. Putting effort into the world in 1,000 different ways and tracking the return on that effort with a precision that the effort itself rarely matches. And somewhere in all that doing, you have probably felt the thing I described at the beginning, the treadmill, the disconnection, the sense of going through motions that no longer feel fully yours. What Krishna is offering through the teaching of Karma Yoga is not an escape from the doing. He is not inviting you to withdraw, to renounce, to become someone who no longer participates in the ordinary requirements of a human life. He is inviting you back in, but differently, from a different place, with a different quality of attention and a different relationship to the outcomes of your effort. He is saying, act. Act fully. Act with everything you have. Bring genuine skill and genuine care to the work in front of you, but release your grip on the results. Not because results do not matter, they do, but because your grip on them is the very thing generating the anxiety and the disconnection and the exhaustion that makes so much of the doing feel so heavy. Give the action, release the outcome. Trust that sincere effort, freely given, is its own completion. This is Karma Yoga. This is the skill in action that Krishna calls yoga, and it has never been more needed than it is now. In a culture that measures everything by its return and has almost completely forgotten the profound, ancient, deeply human experience of doing something simply because it is yours to do, because the doing is an expression of who you are, because the giving is its own reward. That experience is available to you, not in a different life, not in a different set of circumstances, in this one, today, in whatever action this day brings to your hands. Pick it up completely, hold the outcome lightly, and discover what it feels like to act, at last, as a free person. If this teaching gave you something real, something that landed not just as an idea, but as a feeling, a recognition, a memory of something you always knew but had perhaps forgotten, carry it forward. Subscribe to this channel, leave a like on this video, not as a transaction, but as a continuation of this community of people who are choosing to bring more consciousness, more care, and more genuine presence to the work and the life in front of them. What we are building here is a space for the kind of depth and honesty that ordinary life does not always make room for, and you being here is already a part of that. Until next time, give fully, hold lightly, and remember that the doing itself, when it is truly offered, is already enough.